Hello, welcome. You are listening to KLLG LP 97.9, Willits, California, and welcome to Baby Talk. Hi there, this is your host, Mama J, and I am super pleased and happy to be having our first show, Baby Talk. I am super pleased and happy to be having our first show, Baby Talk. This is a project that has been in the works in my mind for some time now, and I am so happy and delighted to be bringing this into reality. Today, I am pleased to welcome to our show our first guest and also co-host of the show, Monika Rojika. Hi, Monika. Welcome.
Hi, Janine. Thank you for having me and giving this opportunity to myself and the community. This is amazing.
Thank you for being here, and I'm so glad. Monika and we met probably about 5 years ago. Is that right?
We met when I was pregnant and you just had your newborn baby.
Right, exactly. And as things go, it's kind of interesting because we had that meeting, but we definitely finally have fallen into orbit recently. And with the talking of creating this show, we have just been on definitely the same plane. So pleased to be collaborating with you. And how long have you been living in Willits, Monika?
I moved to Willits 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. And so why did you move to Willits?
I bought a home here.
And where were you living before?
I lived up on McNabb Ranch, which is just south of Ukiah and then over in a rural area. It was in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And before that in Capella, Eastside Capella.
Oh, wonderful. Nice. And so you are a licensed, certified professional midwife. And how is that in this community? And tell us a little bit about that.
So I hold a state license in California, and I also have a national certification, which is Certified Professional Midwife. And to let you know a little bit more about midwifery, midwifery is a regulated profession, and we in California are regulated through the medical board. So it's the same agency that licenses physicians here in California. Other states have different regulations.
So you had to go through a lot of schooling, I imagine. When did you decide that you wanted to be a midwife?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. So from a really young age, my mom was always really open with us about sexuality and the human body and natural fertility and menstruation and those kinds of topics. So I was blessed to grow up with a mom that was really open. So I already felt really open to that. And then in high school, I had a lot of people come to me with a lot of personal problems around women's health. And I felt like a lot of people really trusted me from a really young age, like 13, 14, 15. So I didn't actually realize I wanted to become a midwife until my early 20s. But when I was in college at age 19, I took a female physiology class. I went to UC Santa Cruz and I double majored in women's studies and psychology. And I really was called to go into women's health. I just wasn't sure how that would work yet. And then after graduation, after traveling, I was working with teen moms in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in 2002 attended my first birth. And that was the gateway. It was like everything kind of opened up after that experience, and it was revealed to me that I wanted to become a home birth midwife from that first birth.
And at this first birth, you were just being a doula? You were just helping? How did that come about?
I got called by this mom who was age 17 and the dad was age 18. They were monolingual Spanish speaking. I speak Spanish fluently. And I had spoken to her prenatally about the possibility of coming because she wasn't sure she would have support. And it wasn't in my job duty to attend births, but I did a lot of health education. And she called me, I believe it was around 2:30 in the afternoon. She had already been in labor for close to 20 hours and she needed my support. And I said, absolutely. And I left work and I just showed up at the hospital. And I speak Spanish fluently, so I ended up being her support person and her translator. I guess interpreter is really the correct term. But what happened through that birth was she almost ended up with a cesarean, but because there was this one nurse involved and she said, she was actually signing paperwork and almost getting wheeled in, the nurse said, let me just go ahead and check you one more time. And the nurse said, oh my gosh, you're actually complete. You can go ahead and push. Go ahead and push even though we're going to have this surgery, but maybe the baby will come out vaginally. And this baby did come out vaginally. And what I noticed was it does really make a difference who your birth attendants are. And I took that to heart and I really have really carried that with me. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And I got to watch her daughter grow up for another year or two after that. Which is amazing because the program was a continuous program until they aged out at age 20. So, or the children turned 5, whichever came first. So that's how I got involved. And then right away, it's like I made that decision and I started meeting midwives and I started meeting people who were studying midwifery. And this is back in 2002 when it wasn't as common as it is now. Like there's a lot more programs now, a lot more educational routes. Back then, there were only 2 programs certified for California.
Mm-hmm. And so getting into the midwifery program, what is it that you had to do and how long was that process?
Well, I continued my work with the teen moms for another 3 years, and I attended 20 births as a doula. I ended up doing a lot of training while I was working full-time with moms and became a doula and a health educator and a childbirth teacher, and I was also studying yoga concurrently. I've studied yoga since I was 17 years old. So I continued all those pathways, and when I decided to go to midwifery school, I was looking for a program that would be certifiable in California. California has one of the highest standards in the U.S. to become a midwife, and I knew I wanted to practice in California because I love it here.
Who doesn't?
So when I was making my decision, there were only a couple programs in the country at the time. And the program that I chose is called Maternidad La Luz. It's still in existence. It began in 1988. They've trained, I believe, over 500 or 600 midwives at this point. And while I was there, I went in 2005 and 2006. They had attended their 10,000th birth. So I think they're close to 18,000 or 20,000 births now that they've attended at that school. So it's a pretty powerful place, and it's on the Texas-Mexico border. Almost all the clients are from Mexico, and they speak Spanish exclusively. So for me, it was an easy choice because I'm really passionate about women's health, and I speak Spanish fluently, and I love working with Latinas, Mexicanas, and it was just a natural fit for me. And it's also an accelerated program because I needed something that the breath was really deep, but it was also relatively quick because financially there's almost no financial aid to become a midwife. So it was about $25,000 I invested into that program, and I was able to, and I stayed for about 14 months, and I completed my clinical and academic training and attended over 120 births in a year, and did 600 or 700 prenatal visits, 400 or 500 postpartum visits, 100 pap smears, 200 blood draws. It was very, very intensive, but it was also something really needed in preparation for the variability of birth and dealing with different things that birth comes up, if that makes sense.
Indeed. And that sounds really extensive. And how is the path to becoming a midwife different from being a nurse in a hospital?
Well, there's actually two routes of entry into midwifery. It's a great question, Janine. Actually, this is one of the number one questions I get when I work with students is how do you become a midwife? And I remember in the beginning, I didn't know how to do it. And I actually had to ask several midwives, and I wasn't getting the answers, and I had to do a lot of research. And this is in 2002 when the internet wasn't as available as it is now, where you can just Google anything. So you had to do a lot of talking, a lot of, trying to get conversations going. So there's two routes of entry. One is called the direct entry route, which is what I did, and I ended up becoming a licensed midwife and a certified professional midwife. The other route of entry is through nursing, and it's called certified nurse midwife. So those women who do certified nurse midwifery usually have an undergraduate degree in nursing already, or they have to pursue a nursing degree, a BSN, and then they go into a master's level nurse midwifery program at one of the schools that offers that program. There's only two schools in the country where you can go in with a different undergraduate than nursing degree and still become a nurse midwife in 3 years. And right now, the criteria for nurse midwifery has changed, and it's a 4-year program, and it's a PhD. And the investment financially, do you want to hear it?
Of course.
It's $250,000 to become a nurse midwife. But it is also about, 40 to 50,000 or more to become a licensed midwife. So people get shocked when I say that. But that's the reality of what we have right now. Our healthcare system needs midwives, but there's a lot of obstacles to becoming a midwife because there's not a lot of financial aid available. So that's one of the things I'm working on changing, is to make it much more accessible and available. We need midwifery training in community colleges, I believe.
That is an extraordinary number. I'm so surprised that people are even able to do that. But yes, it is something that we definitely need. So currently you have your own practice in Willits. Is that correct?
Yes. I started my practice, Tree of Life Midwifery Services, in 2008, 9 years ago. And I serve all of Mendocino County. I go up to Southern Humboldt. I go to Lake County, and occasionally to Sonoma County. So my focus is rural, underserved communities. And I go all over, and it's really beautiful because we do a lot of home visits, and we get to really see families in their own environment. And then, of course, they're planning a home birth, so it's very beneficial for us to be familiar with their space and with other children might be present and their partner, and if there's animals in the home and all those kinds of things. It's so different than hospital birth, but it's lovely.
It sounds like you become a little bit a part of the family.
Yeah, it's a really unique role, and one of my sayings is that you get a midwife for life. So even once you're no longer their midwife because the baby's born and we do 6 to 8 weeks of postpartum care, it's something really special living in a small area, is that you do get to see those families repeatedly and you see the kids grow up. And that's one of my favorite aspects of the work, is the continuity. And of course, women come back and get, they can get their well woman care, or they have their next baby. So it continues into the next phase. And I'm not old enough yet in my practice to have repeat clients where they were my client and then, they were born at home with me and then now they're having a baby. But there's midwives I know who've been practicing for 30 years or longer who are getting the second generation of families coming back. So that's, to me, really, really special.
That's beautiful. Yes, indeed. And so Mendocino being this beautiful, sprawling county, how deep do you go? How far will you go to help a family?
That's a good question. That question really has to reside with the mom and the dad, because people feel differently being away from the hospital. So I go out far for families. The furthest I've been is about 2 hours out from services. And when I mean services, I mean a hospital that has access to cesarean section and a NICU. So the Willits Hospital does not do births. They can attend emergencies like if a mom were to bleed a lot and need a blood transfusion, they can go ahead and help with that, but they can't do a cesarean, and they don't have a NICU. So the closest place is Ukiah. There's also a hospital on the coast in Fort Bragg that has obstetrical services. So I've been, generally an hour to an hour and a half is what I like to do, and I have been up to 2 hours away from hospital backup. Generally, if a family is more than 45 minutes from a hospital, we ask them to get a helicopter service, because that's usually the fastest way, if there is a true emergency, for them to get to the hospital. In our area, too, we have to keep in mind that our hospital can only handle certain things. So if the baby is really preterm, so if the baby's coming before usually 35 weeks, sometimes they let you do a birth there at 34, but usually 35 is the earliest the Ukiah Hospital will attend a birth. You have to go down to either Santa Rosa or San Francisco, because they don't have facilities for preterm babies. And there's other variations they can't really handle. The NICU is considered a secondary NICU, so they can do certain things like oxygenation, but they don't have the equipment that would allow a baby to be able to breathe that wasn't breathing on its own. So those babies would get airlifted to a higher level facility. And UC San Francisco is generally where moms go who have super preemie babies. So as early as 24 weeks, which is the age of viability, they will be able to often help those babies and keep those babies alive. And so it's pretty amazing, how remarkable that a woman could go into labor at barely 6 months and her baby survives. So those are, just to be clear, for home birth, you have to be low risk, you have to be term, so at least 37 weeks pregnant, and right now we only do single pregnancies, so no twins, and baby needs to be head down. So just to be really clear about that. So home birth isn't for everybody. It's not for moms with, and the whole risk category, we could have a whole conversation about what entails risk, what means high risks. But basically, if a mom has a condition that puts extra strain on her body or her baby, then it's probably not appropriate for her to have a home birth. I can give an example. For example, if a mom is taking insulin because she has type 1 diabetes, she is probably not a candidate. In fact, it's probably not okay for her to have a home birth. The reason being is there's more involved with those hormones and that condition itself in the way the baby grows and develops, as well as the sugar issues that can come up. So those are just one example. But I would say like 95% of women in this area are super healthy and super robust. And the benefit of having a home birth midwife is that you get the continuity of care. So it's really, really rare that we get preterm labors. And I believe part of that is because we focus so much on nutrition and we really give a lot of support to the mom that more often than not, they go at least to 37 weeks. Not always. Sometimes that it can still happen that they have their baby early, but that's our goal, is to get babies to term and at least 5.5 pounds before they can be born at home.
Indeed. So for you as a traveling midwife, do you have an office that you work out of as well?
I do. I have an office in Ukiah, and I see families out of there, and then I also do home visits. And actually living in a rural area, I've used other office spaces as well, and I sometimes have a home office too. I have a space in my home that I can use to see clients out of, do exams and all of those things. So it just depends. We get pretty creative because we're so rural. So like moms that are like Laytonville and North, I may actually use another space up there if they're not wanting to come all the way down to Ukiah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very versatile. Thank you for that. So you are a mother, and I wanted to get into asking you and talking to you about your birth story. You became a midwife and then you became a mother. And what was your birth plan, and how was that flow for you, knowing so much in your profession?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I'm actually kind of excited and nervous to share some of my birth story. So I just wanted to, I guess, preclude it by saying there were different factors before I was even in labor. One thing is that I was a single mom. My daughter's dad and I parted ways when I was in my third trimester, which isn't ideal. It's very stressful. I had also moved in my third trimester from Arcata. I used to live up in Arcata from 2008 to 2011 and worked up there as a midwife. And so I actually changed communities also in my third trimester. So those two factors before I get into the birth. That's a lot of transition. It is a lot of transition.
Right.
As far as the birth plan, I was planning to birth at home from before I got pregnant. Just I'm super excited about that.
Did you have a midwife in mind?
Yes, I had several midwives. So when I was up in Arcata, I started seeing a couple midwives up there. And I was also going to the community center called North Country Clinic up there because I like to cover all my ducks in a row and I like to make sure I have backup. So I did what's called parallel care. And then at like 30 weeks, I moved to Mendocino County. And I had a midwife who at the time was a friend of mine. And as soon as I became pregnant, asked her to attend my birth, and she was really excited about it. And then I had another midwife who was assisting the birth and a backup midwife. And then because I'm a single mom and I thought I should cover all my bases, I also asked another woman who was a doula and a student midwife to come to my birth as a doula. So I had 4 people on call for me.
Beautiful.
And I was living by myself, and the day before I went to labor, I actually had a lot of pre-labor. I kind of knew I was getting ready. I went past my due date, which is totally normal for a first-time mom. And the day before I went into labor, I was in a full headstand. So I've continued to practice yoga my whole pregnancy. And I had met a lot of community here. I network really well. And so I had quite a bit of friends and support. And even my landlord was like really awesome and really helpful. So I felt, even though I'm a single mom living by herself, which obviously isn't ideal, I had a lot of support. And the day I went into labor, so the day before I just had a lot of pre-labor, and I laid around and I canceled all my appointments, and I just stayed at home by myself that day.
Wait, hold on one moment. Were you still practicing as a midwife when you were pregnant?
Yes, ma'am.
Super mama.
Yeah, it was really awesome. It's actually really exciting because when I conceived my daughter was the day I did my first birth in Mendocino. She was conceived in Eureka, but she was actually also conceived in Mendocino. So I continued to practice my whole pregnancy. I attended 1 to 2 births a month. The last birth I attended was around 34, 35 weeks pregnant. And my last postpartum visit was at 38 weeks pregnant. And then I did a placenta encapsulation. I started doing placenta encapsulations when I was pregnant. And my last one was at 40 weeks. I did 2 during my 40th week.
Okay, I'm going to have to just divert right there. Placenta encapsulation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so... I'd love to. So we're going to come back to the birth story.
We'll definitely have to come back because I know all the listeners are probably saying, placenta encapsulation, what is that? Googling it right now.
That's a great question. So, I first learned about placentas, being able to consume them when I was a student of midwifery, and I always thought it was so fascinating. And the placenta is such a useful organ. I mean, it helps the baby grow. It produces all the hormones. It breathes for the baby. It detoxifies the baby. It does so many things, right? But it also has a role postpartum. So as soon as the baby's born, the placenta generally detaches, the next few minutes or the next half hour or so and comes out. and the baby and the placenta are connected through a cord. So in the West, there's a big tradition of cutting the cord. But sometimes in home, we wait to cut the cord. We often wait at least, 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour, just depending. And then the placenta...
With the idea just because, or is there a reasoning behind that?
There's definitely a reasoning, Janine. Well, there's about 150 milliliters of blood backed up in the placenta that belongs to the baby. And the baby only weighs 7 pounds. The baby only has about 500 milliliters of blood. So the equivalent of the baby not getting that full supply of blood is the equivalent of an adult that weighs about 150 pounds losing 1.5 liters of blood.
Wow.
So most adults who are not pregnant who lose 1.5 liters of blood would probably die or need a dire transfusion. So that blood belongs to the baby, and there's a reason we wait, because that blood has stem cells in it, it has iron, it has oxygen, and I want to tell you, it's really important to keep that cord intact until it stops pulsing.
Well, why are they cutting it in hospitals then? Why is that such the thing that you think of as first thing the baby comes out, next thing we're cutting the cord?
It's the way people have been trained and programmed in hospitals that as soon as a baby comes out, you get the surgical tools out and you start severing the ties. So then you have two patients, the mom and the baby, and you can separate the mom and baby. Of course, it's a lot harder to do when the baby's still attached with the placenta inside to the cord, right? So to be quite honest, I think it's an old practice, and actually our hospital is getting really good at they're calling it delayed cord clamping, but I like to call it optimal cord clamping. And it's at least waiting 5 minutes after the birth of the baby for the cord to stop pulsing. Generally, by 5 minutes, 80 to 90% of cords are not pulsing. But let me tell you something else. When the baby's in trouble and you need to resuscitate the baby, do not cut the cord. That cord will continue to pulse. I did a resuscitation last year. It was 22 minutes, and that cord pulsed for 22 minutes with oxygen-rich blood, and that baby was fine. So I just wanted to say that, because there's a reason for it. It's actually just shock to cut the cord for the baby. But that's another story. So back to the placenta encapsulation. So I was really fascinated by placenta. I never thought they were gross, and I looked at every single placenta during, after the birth. And when I think right before I got pregnant, I started learning about encapsulation, and I took a program from this woman. I took a class first, and then I did her program, and I just started offering it. At the time, this is about 6.5 years ago, there were very few options, so I got a lot of calls right away. And I go and help the mom either at her home or another location, and I turn her placenta into these capsules. So I call them like vitamins. They're vitamins made by your body, and they're really good for postpartum healing. They help increase milk supply. They prevent postpartum hemorrhage and bleeding excessively. They have lots of iron and lots of minerals. They're very protein rich, and they basically help with mood and all the hormones. You know how crazy it is after having a baby. It's just so emotional and draining.
Oh, I know.
Right, because you've had 3 of your own. Janine's a super mama.
I totally understand. So are there other ways to be consuming the placenta that are recommended or that you know of?
Sure, there's lots of ways. Well, some moms will choose to have it right away, and we can put it in a smoothie for her. And there's, besides the encapsulation, it can be made into food, like a soup or tacos, like pretty much like any kind of meat, you could cook it up. And some moms would consume it that way, but most modern moms are not going to want to eat their whole placenta the first day or 2 postpartum. It's kind of a lot. They're pretty big. They weigh about 2 pounds depending on the size of the baby. So it's kind of a lot for the modern woman, but you can do it that way. I also have a chocolate recipe. You can do chocolate placenta too. So there's many, many recipes. It just depends on what the mom desires.
Wow. Well, when we get our website, we will be linking that up, chocolate placenta recipes. And right now, we're just going to take one little break, and you are listening to KLLG LP 97.9, Willits, California. And we will get back with Monika and her birth story right after this moment.
And we are all bright, and we can all soar far past boundary, content that less is more. Birds of the same flight, heading into the sun, shape shifting all the days until we are all one. Mechanics of power are pulsing in your cells. Just stand up and connect. Hold tightly to your bell, 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 bell. We are all bright. We are all bright. We are all bright. Heading into the sun. We are all bright. Heading into the sun. We are all bright. We are all bright. Heading into the sun. We are all bright. Heading into the sun. We are all bright.
We are back with Baby Talk. Mama J here. We were just listening to the lovely ladies of Rising Appalachia on their Wider Circles album, and that was Synchronicity. We are back with Monika Rojiska, and she has been sharing with us the pretty amazing and extraordinary life of being a rural licensed certified professional midwife in Mendocino County. And the theme of this show really came about from sitting around after I had my first child, and sitting around and sharing birth stories with other new mamas. And that was just really powerful time for us as mamas. That's just something that just comes with, you just keep that with you. It's just your badge of honor, or just your story. And so we are going to continue with Monika here. And I want to just have Monika share her birth story. It's just so powerful. And Monika, thank you again. We were talking in circles, as women do, and we're coming back to that. And Monika, so where were we? I like to start off where we left off, or however you say that.
So I'm approaching my I passed my due date, and I know that's totally normal. I'm not worried about that. And I have a few women on call for me for the birth. And my daughter's dad, like I said, we parted ways when I was pregnant, when I was 30 weeks pregnant. And we actually were not really in communication during the rest of the pregnancy. But he was on his way from another state. He lives across the country in Alabama. And the morning that I actually officially started labor, he was on his way, and he was in Los Angeles at the time. So I had mentioned that I had a day of just like early labor, and I kind of hung out by myself, and I took a lot of naps, and I knew labor was approaching. And then I slept through the night, and then on the 23rd of September 2011, I woke up at 7, and I started having contractions right away at 7 in the morning. And I was like, okay, let's just see what happens. And they definitely got stronger and closer together. And so, because I was by myself, and I knew from all the hundreds of births I've done that it's hard to talk on the phone when you're in labor. So I was like, oh, I better reach out for some support soon, because I might not be able to call or text in like an hour or two. And the midwife that I had hired for the birth was actually at another birth, and she had already been there for 2 days, and it was far away. It was in the Bay Area, and she said, I'll be there when I can. Go ahead and call your backup. And so I did. And my backup was like, I'm not super available today either. I have stuff going on. I'm like, really? Well, I'm really in labor. So I called the third midwife, and she was like, well, I'll come to your birth, but I have someone else in labor also.
Oh, my goodness.
And then my doula...
Was that a full moon?
No, it wasn't a full moon, but there was something going on vortex-wise. And then the woman that I had asked to be my doula, she also had something come up for her. So all of a sudden, my 4 people that are supposed to be on call are not available. And I'm by myself as a single mama planning a home birth. And I'm like, okay, this kind of sucks. But I'm a resourceful woman. And I actually called this friend of mine, my friend Sarah, and she was also pregnant. And we met in a yoga class here locally. And I was like, I'm in labor and I'm by myself and no one's really available right now. Can you come over and hang out with me? Because I don't know how much longer I can be on the phone. I'm starting to be in labor land here. And so she was like, oh, I just drove past your house. Let me come over. So she totally came over. And yeah, like I remember, things get kind of, I started my contractions got close together pretty quick, and for a first-time mom, that can be normal, and sometimes it's unusual for it to go so fast. And I remember when I started throwing up, and I actually started throwing up and kind of didn't stop for the rest of the labor, I said, I really need a midwife here. So my friend was already over. We had set up the birth tub. I had a birth tub there. But when I started vomiting and I was having contractions every 3 minutes, that lasted for over a minute, I thought it was time to get a midwife there, just intuitively as a woman and as a midwife.
Right. So in the process, were you feeling were you having your midwife brain on, or were you having your mama brain on, or was there a primal brain going, or how was that?
You know, it was so interesting because I had always heard that if you become a midwife first and then you have a baby after, that you are not going to get an easy birth. And so I had I had read a lot of stories like that, and I had also talked to other experienced midwives, because a lot of people will have home births first and then they decide to become midwives. But for me, I was already a midwife for 9 years before I had my daughter. So I wasn't expecting an easy birth, but the labor pattern seemed like things were moving forward pretty quickly. So especially with the contraction rate. And so to answer your question, I was turned on as a midwife, but at one point it became hard. Like, I remember trying to take my own heart tones, but then with throwing up and contractions every 3 minutes lasting a minute, it's kind of hard to like focus on anything. So, and my contractions were strong. I'm a strong woman, so they were not easy. So I started vocalizing and moving around. I believe it was around 1.
How many hours have you already been in?
7 in the morning.
Okay.
So around 1 p.m., the third midwife, the backup to the backup, came over, the one that had like another birth. My main midwife was not available yet. The backup couldn't do it either. So she came over and we hung out, and she was like, yeah, you sure sound like you're in labor. I'm like, yeah, I know. I wouldn't have called you. I think they all thought I was earlier than I was because I waited to call until I really needed a midwife. So they were like, oh, well, she's rocking out. So she's like, do you mind if I check you? So the first time she checked me, I was already 5 centimeters at like 1:30, which is pretty fast. Starting labor at 7, that's only 5 hours. And I was definitely like rocking on. And then at some point, probably, gosh, I mean, I don't exactly remember the time super well, but maybe let's say around 3:30 or 4, my water broke. And I remember, so to answer your question, I was still kind of my midwife brain, but I was also in labor land. So definitely not, things weren't as clear to me at that point and weren't making sense as much as if I'm not in labor. And I remember noting some meconium. So meconium, for those of you who don't know, is the baby's first poop. And when that happens in utero, it could be totally normal, or it could be a sign that maybe the baby's stressed out. So I remember looking at it and being like, oh, interesting, there's meconium. And I think the midwife who was with me at the time noted it as well. And at that point, my daughter's heartbeat was pretty good. So I labored along, and then around the evening time, the assistant midwife showed up, and she was like, I can't really stay for your birth. And the other midwife was like, this woman's going to have her baby, right? And I need to leave soon. And my first midwife's like tied up still at this birth far away. And I'm just like, well, what's going on? And then my daughter's, and I was a little confused at that point. And then my daughter's dad showed up right around sunset. I think it was around like 6:30 or 7. And I remember not really, because we hadn't talked for a long time, it was really hard to connect with him, and everything just didn't feel good. It was just really, really hard. At this point, I'm 7 centimeters. I'm throwing up every other contraction, and nothing's in my system. I'm just like, this hurts. I was actually in pain the whole time, like during contractions and in between contractions. I remember being like, where's my break? I'm supposed to get this break in between contractions, right? Like women will have their rush and then they'll have their break. Well, I never got that for my labor. And so it's really intense. And then around like the evening time, about an hour after he got there, it was like 8 or 9 at night, the midwives were like, you need to go to the hospital. And I was like, what? I was like, no. Because that was like, in my mind, like, no, I'm having a home birth. But they were like, at that point, I got a little confused, and I thought the reason I was going to the hospital was because they had to leave, which both of them did have to leave. And they're like, well, go ahead and send you to the hospital. This doctor's on. She's really great. I had already met her prenatally because I did parallel care. And you'll be fine, you know, you'll have your baby. And I was like, I don't want to go to the hospital, you guys. And they cried, and they were like, we're worried about your baby. And I was like, really? And at that point, I guess I was so in labor that I was like, why? Why are you worried about my baby? And they tried to explain it to me, but I was just like, no, I want to try at home. But anyway, so we ended up going to the hospital. The midwife drove me. And then my daughter's dad was there. And then basically I got dropped off at the hospital. And then the other midwife couldn't stay. She had this other birth. 2 of the midwives weren't available. We called, supposedly they called 2 other midwives, but everybody was like, no, I'm not taking this on. So I was like really upset because I actually begged for a doula. I was like, I want a doula here. Like, I want someone here with me at the hospital. I don't want to be by myself. And they were like, sorry, we're going to go. And I was like, that sucks. And then my daughter's dad had driven for 4 days, so he basically like fell asleep. And so I was like by myself. I was in a lot of pain, and I had a really good midwife at the hospital, and she was awesome. And I told her I didn't want an epidural. And she said, that's fine. We're not even going to talk about an epidural until you get a bag of IV fluids, because I was like super dehydrated after vomiting for hours and hours, you know. So I agreed. I said, fine, but no Pitocin. And she said, that's fine. You don't need Pitocin. Your contractions are really strong, obviously. And then I was still at 7. And anyway, long story short, after like 3 hours of trying at the hospital natural, you know, the doctor comes in and she's like, look, your baby's not doing great. You're tired. I think though your best chance, and at this point, like the C-section card came up for the first time. This is around like midnight now. Your best chance of a vaginal birth is if you get an epidural, and maybe you'll be able to do it. But something's going on. Your baby's not coming out. You've been having these contractions. You've been at 7 centimeters for like over 8 hours now with back-to-back contractions. So something's going on. I think your baby's asynclitic, which means the baby's not in right alignment in the pelvis, and there might be something else. So I ended up pretty much getting all the interventions that I was hoping to avoid at home, and I got the epidural, I got Pitocin at one point, I got an intrauterine pressure catheter to measure the strength of the contractions. You know, I also had a urine catheter. I mean, just everything I didn't want at home, but I kind of went with it because at that point it's like you have to have your baby out. And I kind of knew things were going downhill because I just couldn't feel my baby anymore after the epidural, and I just felt like I wasn't going to be able to get her out. And I just stayed by myself overnight, cried, and I remember, I think I called my mom and just told her what was going on. I was just like, this sucks. This isn't what I imagined, you know, this. And then she was like, where's your midwife? I'm like, she's at another birth. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I can't get anybody here. Her dad's across the room asleep all night. And then in the morning, like I was like 8 in the morning, they were like, well, let's check you one more time. I got to like 9 centimeters, right? But my baby was not coming down. She was still high up. At that point, I was in labor for over 24 hours.
Wow.
And with ruptured membranes for almost 24 hours. So there were just, you know, it was time for, and her heartbeat wasn't great at that point. So just all those factors, and I knew she needed to be born. So I basically just surrendered. And I was like, okay, this is what's happening. And like, this wasn't the plan. It was in plan A. It was in plan B. Okay, we're going with plan C. Cesarean birth, you know. And I just like, I remember surrendering and just saying, if this is how it is, it's how it is. And I just like, I'm always like a really strong woman, and I think it was like meant to push me to the next level of being a mom and being a single mom and also as a midwife. So I just accepted it. And I just remember like as soon as I accepted it, it was okay. Like it was still a beautiful process. It gets emotional for me. But I have to say, like, all of you mamas, I mean, 1/3 of us are having cesareans, and like when you hear your baby cry for the first time, I don't care what setting you're in, it's the most amazing thing. And my oxytocin was really high even in the operating room. And I did, you know, the things I wish I would have had, which now the hospital has changed, is like I wish I would have been able to hold my baby right away. And I wish that she would have stayed with me. But I did get to kiss her in the operating room, and her dad stayed with her the whole time. So her dad came in for the surgery and all of that. And it took just like 30 minutes to get sewn back up and to go to recovery. And then I got my baby, and like we were inseparable. And she nursed pretty much right away. And I sent healing to my body, and I just said, well, I already had the surgery, so I have to recover. And the funny thing is, Janine, I had never even had surgery ever in my life besides my wisdom teeth. So to have a cesarean birth as a home birth midwife was like ultimate irony. And I actually did experience postpartum depression as a result, and my placenta did help with that. But allow yourself, mamas, integration. And no matter what birth you have, you know, there's a time to integrate it. And I just remember having a traumatic birth, and it wasn't the cesarean that was traumatic, to be quite honest. It was the fact that as a home birth midwife, I've always done everything to support women, and not to have that support myself, especially in a hospital setting, was actually pretty devastating. And it did affect our relationships with the birth community. Obviously, it's been 5.5 years. My daughter's great. Everybody's great. But that's what I wish, is I wish all women could have that support. And it actually has made me a stronger woman, stronger mom, stronger midwife. And I am so grateful for my birth. And you know what? The day I left the hospital, I was planning my VBAC, my vaginal birth after cesarean. So I don't know if I'll have any more kids, but I want to tell you, mamas, that even if you've had a cesarean, 1 or 2 cesareans, you can have a vaginal birth. You can even have a home birth after that. And I just wanted to encourage you to keep hoping for your dreams, because, you know, I feel like being a mom, no matter how it comes to you, is special. And one more thing, I know we're really short on time now, is one thing that was really hard with the integration is in the natural birth community, which I was a part of for almost a decade before I had my own baby, there's not a lot of support if you have a hospital birth, especially if you have a cesarean birth. And that's something that I have really, really worked on changing, because I believe that those mamas actually need more support, not less support. And it's almost like people drop off the face of the earth because, oh, you had a cesarean, so you're not in our system. And so that was hard for me, was just that integration. Every time I would tell my birth story, it's gotten easier and easier, and it's actually a positive birth story now. But I would cry, like in the first 9 months, I would cry every time I told it. And so I just wanted to share that. And hopefully, I know it's the first birth story was shared, but hopefully it's inspiring. And I feel like it was positive because I grew from it, and it obviously didn't kill me. So here I am 5.5 years later. And oh, one more thing is my scar is my daughter's birthplace, and I touch my scar every day. And those of you who've had babies, especially if you've had babies through your belly, like I have, massage and love your scar. It is your child's birthplace. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I got a little emotional there, but I felt it was good to share.
I think we all did. Thank you so much, Monika, for sharing your birth story. You are a warrior. I had perma-chills the whole time, and I just really appreciate you sharing that. Sharing your story, I think, will help other women, and that is really the purpose of this show. And as well, we will be sharing more birth stories. We will be sharing all things about women's health, politics, baby tips, lots of things. So join us again. Thank you for joining us for our first show, Baby Talk. Thank you, Monika, for sharing your birth story and so much wisdom, and we really appreciate it. This has been Baby Talk on KLLG LP 97.9, Willits, California. Thank you all. Have a beautiful day, and we will talk with you soon. Bye.
Done so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right. Done so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right. faith in me. Oh, no, that's what matters. If you give me a chance, I'll try. See, I've been climbing stairs, but mostly stumbling down. I've been reaching high, always losing ground. You see, I conquered hills. I still have mountains to climb. Oh, right now, doing the best I can at this point in my life. Before we take a step, before we walk down that path, before I'm making any promises, before you have regrets, before we talk commitment, let me tell you of my past, all I've seen and all I've done, things I'd like to forget at this point in my life. This point in my life, like to live as if only love mattered, as if redemption was inside, as if this hurts to live honestly is all that anyone needs. No matter if you find it. See, when I touch the sky, Earth's gravity has pulled me down. But now I've reconciled that in this world, birds and angels get the wings to fly. I can't believe in this heart of mine. Oh, if you can give it a try, then I'll reach inside, find and give you all the sweetness that I have. Oh, at this point in my life. At this point in my life.
Thank you once again for listening to our first episode of Baby Talk. We will be back again. Thank you for joining us. This is KLLG 97.9 Willits, California. Have a beautiful day. This is Mama J saying peace, love, and harmony.